thank you all for coming. My name is Lucas Alice, and I was asked to chair this Hustings today. I am the co-chair of a neighbouring branch of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the one in Camden. And we have a policy of helping each other, so I'm very pleased to be here to help the Brent and Harrow branch with this Hustings. I would also like to thank the church for having given us this space, and this is I'm particularly grateful because these days there aren't that many spaces that are available for the Palestine Solidarity movement. So thank you to them. The toilets are through there. You have to go out here, turn left and then right. And there are a couple of steps. You go down there are the gents and the ladies, and before the steps there is a disabled toilet as well. I don't think we have any fire alarm planned, so if it makes it's probably a real one. And I would like to remind you to switch off your mobile phones if you haven't done so already. We have asked all candidates have invited all candidates to come, and 3 have arrived. 3 have arrived, and they are Pam Fitzpatrick, who is running as an independent, Chris Noyce, who is from the Liberal Democrats, and we have Rupert George, who is from the Green Party. The incumbent, Gareth Thomas, from the Labour Party, is not here, and neither are the Conservatives or the Respect and the other parties. And you can draw your own conclusions from the absence. I am not going to interpret that for you, but it's up to you to interpret the fact that some candidates chose to come and some candidates chose not to come. Of course, I mean, the PSC stance on Palestine, it's not, if you want to read it, you can go on their website. Having done that, I will then ask each candidate to speak for 2 minutes, and we have somebody with a stopwatch checking that everybody stays within the allocated space. Thank you. Pam.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. I'm really delighted to be here. So just a little bit about myself in the 2 minutes we've got. Pamela Fitzpatrick, I live and I work in Harrow West. I've been here for 24 years. I returned to Harrow really to be a carer for my mum, who was getting older. She was a widow, and I didn't know at the time, but she had the onset of dementia. But my children then went to local schools here, and I became fully embedded in the community. I've worked in the voluntary sector most of my adult life for organisations like Citizens Advice, Family Rights Group, Child Poverty Action Group. But I can remember when I was at the school gates, there'd often be parents asking me about things where they needed advice, but they couldn't get it in Harrow. And so what I did 15 years ago now, I set up Harrow Law Centre, which I'm a director. I never intended working there, but it kind of took over my life. And from that, I see all the problems that are going on in Harrow, whether it's housing, poverty, the kind of knife crime, everything really. And don't see that any of the parties are actually offering anything to address what's needed. And we've seen the Labour Party manifesto today, which I can only describe as absolutely atrocious, really. So as well as being the director of the Law Centre. I am a director of the Peace and Justice Project with Jeremy Corbyn, but I don't work there. It's more like being a trustee of a charity, but it's not a charity, so I'm a director. But I am very hands-on there as well. I'm a member of Brent and Harrow Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I have been on pretty much all the marches. I've missed a couple, but really been on most of them, both nationally and locally. And I've spoken at quite a lot of the local marches. I was a Labour councillor for 8 years, or just under 8 years. They chucked me out for being a socialist, for giving an interview to a socialist organisation. And that's where the Labour Party is today. So I'm standing as an independent. I was asked to do so. I've never really okay, I'll stop there. Anyway, hand over. 20 seconds.
We said we would wait when there's 20 seconds.
Okay, I probably used the 20 seconds now. I'll stop now, but that's me. We'll come back and answer more questions later on. So thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Chris.
My name is Chris Noyce. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate in this election. I'm a solicitor by profession. I've lived in Harrow for the last 66 years and have never lived in any other borough apart from university. I was a councillor for the Rainsland ward for 28 of the last years.
Sorry, can you speak up?
I was a councillor for Rayners Lane ward for 28 years and was in the 90s. I was almost leader of the council when we had the largest party status. And since then I have continued my work in Rayners Lane and also in Harrow West. And I should say that I think that Palestine is one of the most significant issues in this election and should not be forgotten. And I know I'm probably speaking to the converted, but I happen to believe that it's true. I've also done various other things in my life, apart from being a solicitor and a councillor, but that pretty much occupies all of them. So that's me. I've been a member of the Liberal Democrats and the Liberal Party since 1976, and I've always, as I said, lived in Harrow, and I was actually, I wasn't born here, but I came here back from hospital, and I've been here for the past 66 years. So that's me as a person and as a background.
Thank you, Rupert.
Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here. My name's Rupert George. I'm not from Harrow, I'm afraid. But I have lived in London all my life, and all of my family are from London. It's quite unusual in this day and age. I've worked for the large part of my career as a campaigner. I was a campaign manager for the First National Clean Air Day. I worked for a long time around issues around stop and search. I was a founding trustee of the Stop and Search charity Stopwatch, and I've done lots of work about disproportionate policing and things like that. The Palestinian cause is personally very important to me. My partner is Arabic. My children attend Arabic Saturday school. I've been like Pamela on most of the marches, and most of the marches locally to me where I live in Tower Hamlets. I'm a PCS member in Tower Hamlets as well. It's a very, very important issue in this election. I think it's a very dividing issue in this election. I'm intensely proud to stand as the Green Party candidate. We released our manifesto yesterday. I currently work for the Green Party as the coordinator of that manifesto. We're the only party that's actually espousing putting in enough money into the NHS, into transport, into housing, and actually addressing the issues around living standards and access to public services for ordinary people. And I think that's really wonderful that we've done that, and we've done that in a way where we've drawn lots of very positive comments from people like the Institute for Fiscal Studies. They might not agree with the level of taxation we wish to impose on people with the broadest shoulders, but they've actually stated that our plan actually makes sense, even if they don't agree with the sense it's making. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all three candidates. So the next item is for each candidate to respond to the PSC general statement, which is here, which you may have seen. You can see it on the website. And each candidate also has 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I did actually complete this last night, so I'll just read what I wrote last night for the statement. So I unequivocally support the general statement by Palestine Solidarity Campaign on the actions an incoming government must take in respect to Palestine. Collective punishment, forced displacement, targeting of journalists, healthcare workers and hospitals all constitute war crimes. And it is imperative that those responsible are brought to justice. As an independent MP, I would work with other pro-Palestine MPs, cross-party I would do that if there are any, and vote to achieve the goals that are outlined by PSC. I would continue to work with organisations, as I do now, during protests and campaigns which highlight the many decades of injustice the Palestinian people have had to endure, and which seek to bring about peace and justice for Palestinians. I would advocate for safe legal routes for asylum seekers, such as those provided to Ukrainians. I would also work to change the anti-refugee legislation introduced in 2000 under the Blair government, which seeks to dehumanise and criminalise those fleeing persecution. I would campaign for a reversal of the UK laws which prevent asylum seekers from work, from claiming benefits when they need it, and from being able to live where they choose, rather than being dispersed away from London and the South East. I would also work to end Prevent, which has been used for many years, but particularly now to silence children speaking out about Palestine. I will work to overturn the vast amount of legislation that now impedes the right to protest peacefully. Yeah, I think that's it. That's fine.
Yes.
Right. In the Liberal Democratic Manifesto for the general election published a couple of days ago, one of the things which was said, which I think goes further than the PSC demands, says that we should officially recognise the independent state of Palestine with immediate effect. As far as the actual demands are concerned, I would personally have no problem in supporting those, and I believe that it is in the interest of humanity that we do so. And I believe that this would make a move in the right direction, and it's clear that what has happened in Palestine and in Gaza over the recent few months has been a war crime against humanity, and it is clear that the Palestinian people have been subject to an unspeakable genocide. That's all really I have to say.
I'm really very supportive of this statement. I think that essentially in the next Parliament this is a really critical issue for MPs to address. I actually think that it's about our safety, in the sense that if we have a situation where international law can be ignored in the way it has, I know it has for generations, but in a sense the clarity of it and the clearness of it's being ignored, the fact that we're still sending weapons to Israel from this country actually makes this planet more dangerous for all of us. If we're going to tackle climate change, we actually really need to work together as humanity to make that change. And I think this is a critical juncture in the way that we actually relate to this. So I think in terms of the next Parliament, if I was elected, I think it would be so important to work consistently on this issue. The Green Party called for a ceasefire before any other major party on the 17th of October, long before many of the other parties did. We've taken a significant amount of negative press for that, and we've stood tall about that, and we've continued to support the Palestinian cause. We very much have called in our manifesto, we call for the end of prevent, we call for the end of the hostile environment, we call for safe routes for refugees. All of those things are Green Party policy. I personally feel that what PCS are calling for is just so important. I really urge you to vote with your heads and your hearts on this and vote for a candidate that's actually prepared to stand up in Parliament for these issues. Thank you.
Okay, so we are now going over to the questions. And just to say, there is one question for the Conservative candidate, which I will not be reading because he's not here. But no, I acknowledge that question. But the first question is this. When the ICC, the International Criminal Court, when the ICC issue an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, will your party act in accordance with international law and arrest him if he sets foot on UK territory?
Well, I'm not part of a party, it's just me. And absolutely, I would want him arrested. But all the other people responsible for war crimes as well. There has to be accountability. We can't just forget what's happened. How can we? Something's got to change. And if there's no arrest, if there's no accountability, if they're not brought to justice, then it will happen again and again and again. So we have to do that, and I would support that.
Thank you.
Well, much as it might be nice to hope that he would be arrested, I think that's not going to happen in a month of Sundays. But it should do, because we are in favour of upholding and respecting the international courts and international law, and therefore we should do our best to ensure that these are implemented.
We're very much in support of international law. I think that if it was possible, we would support it 100%. But I think there's a really interesting issue around there about complicity and about the way in which politicians here have aided and abetted what's gone on, in a sense, in Gaza. And to be honest, to an extent in the West Bank as well. And I think it's really important that we follow through on international law in the UK with the actions of UK politicians. I'm sure many of you are aware that there are 30 UK MPs from the previous Parliament who they've been asked to be investigated by the Met for their role over Gaza. I think as a party we would like to see international law upheld here on the actions of UK actors about what they have done, because that's very easily forgotten. Their role has actually been really, really important.
Can I just ask a little supplementary question? Would you be confident to describe what is happening in Palestine as apartheid?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's clear it is. If you look at the kind of laws, the separations of people not being able to move as they want to, it's clearly apartheid. I remember when Amnesty International gave a report, a respected organisation, said it's apartheid. Other respected organisations have. And when, I think it was Kim Johnson, a Labour MP, mentioned this in Parliament, she had to retract it and apologise. It's utterly outrageous. So we have really good organisations telling us, I mean, we can see for ourselves, but it's confirmed by these independent organisations, and yet we're told it's not happening. So we have to change that narrative. And one of the good things that's happened is if you said it was an apartheid state previously, you'd be accused of being an anti-Semite. I mean, you're accused of being an anti-Semite, whatever you say about Palestine. But now I think the language is changing slowly, so we have to keep at it. It's a long, hard battle, I know, but we have to keep doing it.
Thank you. Chris.
Yes, you can call it apartheid, you can call it genocide. point about accepting Palestinian settlers is the fact that Israel has built a huge wall around the West Bank, which is larger than the Berlin Wall, more nasty than the Berlin Wall, and nobody's complained. They should have done, and yet the Berlin Wall itself was demolished years ago, and people used to claim that that was an offence against human rights, which it was.
I think the question about apartheid and why the question's been asked is very much about the attempt to police away support for Palestine and to deny Palestinians the support that people feel for them. I'm really proud that the Green Party stood up on that issue and has continued to voice support for Palestinians. It is clearly an apartheid situation. I really feel that if we're going to make change, we have to keep pressuring and we have to keep being clear and honest about the language and what we do. And the Green Party will continue to do as it has in the face of actually, at the moment, really quite a lot of accusations of anti-Semitism. We will continue to support human rights and international law. Thank you.
The next question is, how would you eradicate child poverty? Eradicate or dramatically reduce?
Thank you. Well, this is the story of my life, really. I worked for Child Poverty Action Group. I used to write the National Welfare Benefits Handbook that they produced for 20 years, co-wrote it. And child poverty doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of the choices that politicians make. So the simple answer, you give people more money. It's not that hard. You pay decent wages. You have jobs that are not on fixed-term contracts. We have employers paying appalling pay, and then people have to be subsidised by the state, but it's employers who are being subsidised. So we need to stop that. That's the start. But because we have people who are in poverty and need to rely on the benefit system, we need a decent, humane benefit system. So we don't have that by any stretch of the imagination. And so if you think about child poverty in Harrow, I think it's roughly 30% if before housing costs. After housing costs, I think it goes up to 60%. And we all know that. Housing is atrocious. Harrow has one of the lowest levels of council homes of any borough. So people on low, moderate and even higher incomes are relying on the private sector, which is hugely expensive, and people get evicted year in, year out, through no fault of their own. So you have to have rent controls to tackle the huge rents. You also have to have a mass programme of council house building, not the luxury tower blocks we've got in Harrow. But then on the benefit side of it, you've heard a lot about the two-child cap and we shouldn't have that. Yes, absolutely, but that's not the only thing. One of the major things for poverty is the overall benefit cap that limits benefit overall. And so if you've got high rents, most of your benefit will go on your rent. So it's not just the two-child thing. The other thing is the local housing allowance for benefits is set at a level way below most rents. So you can't even get enough universal credit and previously housing benefit. Council tax support, you hear a lot in Labour's manifesto today about localisation. Back in 2013, the Conservative Party, and I'm afraid the Lib Dems as well, when they were in a coalition, abolished the National Council Tax Support Scheme. They also abolished the social fund to some extent. And so what happened then is local boroughs had to come up with their own council tax benefit policy. And Harrow had the worst policy of any borough, however 300 odd boroughs there are. And so that's a huge thing that causes poverty in Harrow. So even if you're on income support previously, universal credit, so you've got no other income, you have to pay 30% of your council tax. And we have one of the highest council tax. So what we need is our laws, our society, based on the needs of people rather than the greed of a few. And if we get that into our heads and we start doing that and demanding it, we won't have child poverty. So all of the parties who are saying, I don't know about Lib Dems or Leave Them Speak for themselves, but certainly Labour and Conservatives, nothing that they are doing will changed our poverty. In fact, it's going to increase it, and we have to be really worried about the future of our children. There's much more I could say on it, but I need to stop. I know.
In our manifesto, we are stating that what we really need are fair access to public services and a strong safety net for those who cannot afford it. So this really means helping struggling families. And remember that the cost of living crisis was exacerbated by the Tory government under Liz Truss, who in a 44-day reign of terror managed to tank the economy. I don't really think that there's anything else you can add to that, but we believe in a strong public service, or strong public services, to support those who are less well able to do so.
Poverty is about putting money in people's pockets. We, in our costed manifesto, have an immediate £40 a week uplift to universal credit. We have rent controls that would be dictated by local boroughs if they wish to bring them in. We would get rid of the 2-child benefit cap. We would build 150,000 council houses a year. But above all, what we would do is actually tax those with the broadest shoulders. We would tax the wealthy, so we would tax people worth 10 million, 1% of their assets every year, and people worth a billion, 2% of their assets every year. And we would also equalise income tax with capital gains tax, so that people weren't able to avoid tax, and people who had unearned income from shares paid the same tax as everyone else who was going out to work. And fundamentally, the reason why we can propose these things in a costed manifesto is we're actually prepared to articulate the idea that we should take those tax from the people with the broadest shoulders and build a better society with that money.
The next question has been touched upon already by some of the answers. We don't have any good laws on rent controls because too many landlords are MPs. Maybe it means too many MPs are landlords. What will you do about rents in Harrow?
So yes, as I said, we need rent controls. We used to have them up until 1983 when Thatcher deregulated the private sector in housing. And then you can match the rise in housing benefit because, of course, landlords would just put rents up and then the housing benefit would rise. And the Labour government decided that to stop rents rising, they penalised the tenant and they'd limit the amount of housing benefit you could get. And what's happened, because we've got a housing shortage, is that landlords are not reducing their rents, are they? And they're not going to. So what we need to do is, first of all, rent controls, because we're not going to be able to build enough houses in time. Even 150,000 houses a year is not going to meet the demand. We have enough houses, actually. We don't need to be building more. And people are objecting to all the overdevelopment across London and outside of London. What we need is for those luxury properties to be taken over and used as social housing. And then we wouldn't have a housing crisis. So it's a combination, immediate rent controls, lifting the local housing allowance so it does actually meet the level of rent until we can get sufficient homes that are council homes, social rented. We abolish the term affordable housing because it does not mean affordable housing. It shouldn't be allowed to be used. And that will solve the problem. It's easy.
The problem of rents in the private sector has been around, unfortunately, for more than 30 years. The previous rent control system in this country was abolished by the Housing Act 1988, and it introduced basically the situation that we find today, where the Tories and, dare I say it, the Labour Party have allowed free rein in the private sector. This is not good for the country. Now, we said that there was a situation where we needed to apply a strong safety net, and that, I think, will be something that we could do by way of rent controls. I know that they could be introduced, and I would certainly like to look at them. With regard to the legislation, I think that the Housing Act 1988 is actually a very good piece of legislation, but it achieved the wrong thing because it deregulated the private sector, and it's been deregulated for the past 30 plus years.
We spend out of our taxpayers' money over £10 billion a year on a housing benefit that goes directly to private landlords. So in a sense, what we're doing as taxpayers, if you pay tax, is subsidising private landlords, making their income from their properties. I think that money really needs to be put into social housing, and genuinely social housing. I think rent controls also has to apply to housing associations. I think that Pamela's point about what is actually technically affordable is 80% of market price. As we all know, that 80% of market price is still completely unaffordable for lots of people on low incomes. We have a policy of buying what we call buy the supply. So it isn't just about building new houses, it's also about purchasing from the private sector. We would give councils first refusal on only any houses that were bought under the right to buy. When they come up for sale, the council would have first refusal and be able to buy them back into council stock. So I think it's an excellent policy and would allow us to move more quickly to a situation where we had a sufficient supply of social housing. Obviously, this needs to work with rent controls. I also think there's an issue that if we impose rent controls, then there is a danger that landlords would attempt to sell up, which is why ending Section 21 evictions is so important, which we would do, and we would give private tenants long-term stable leases so that landlords weren't able to continually push rents up when people were in properties. And I think a holistic way of tackling that issue is the way that we're actually going to change the way the property market works in the UK. Going back to my original point about, in the last question, the point about tax. At the moment, lots of landlords are making money by moving tax around in different ways, and we would close those loopholes down. I think in the long term, that's going to make the kind of scam which private landlords, in terms of the way that they borrow money to buy properties, and those buy-to-let landlords, we need to kind of unstick that business model with better regulation and create a situation where we build up that stock of social housing. It's a huge problem that's gone on since the 1980s. We need to reverse that, and that is going to take some time. Thank you.
The next question comes from Slido. I would like to know your view on the Muslim vote. It's an organization called the Muslim Vote. I would like to know your view on the Muslim vote, which Labour is worried about. What is your view?
Well, I know the Muslim vote, and they have recommended people vote for them, so I think they're a wonderful thing. Look, they were an organisation, a new organisation that was set up because they felt, I think, that the major parties took the Muslim vote for granted, but particularly Labour. And you saw that, not just with what's happened with Gaza, but over the years, in terms of what they've been saying, all the issues around Black Lives Matter and racism, Islamophobia within the Labour Party have been dismissed completely. And you've seen the Ford report has said that there's a hierarchy of racism within the Labour Party. So it's been set up to tackle that, and they're wanting to encourage people to vote, first of all, to register to vote. They also want people to think about who they're voting for, and not just, because people do it, don't they? I've always voted Labour, so I'll vote Labour. I've always voted Conservative, so I'll vote Conservative. But think about what track record do they have? What track record does your current MP have? What has he voted for? Now, if you take Gareth, he's been elected, he's been here 27 years. He voted for the Iraq War. He was one of the MPs involved in the expenses scandal. He's voted against repeatedly the inquiry into Iraq. He supports now the two-child benefit policy. Harrow, because of its diversity, has larger families. So that's a direct kind of detriment to his constituents. So look at what they're doing, and that's what the Muslim vote is trying to do, to get people, to think about how they're voting and to vote in the first place, to use your voice. So I think it's a very good thing. Thank you.
Well, I've actually got a copy of the Muslim vote. I saw 18 heads of terms, and I would personally think that I can support all of those. Now, Pamela has referred to the sitting MP, and whatever his views are personally, the problem has always been that he has relied on the Muslim vote automatically, and this time maybe he's just a bit coming unstuck, because his views I don't know, but he is in the party of Keir Starmer, who is quite clear has taken steps over the past few months to, how should I say, to neutralise members and supporters who wanted a different view. For example, he made a mess over the Rochdale by-election where he neutralised the Labour candidate. In the nominations for Parliament, he managed to stop Fawzia Khan standing in Chingford and Woodford Green, and this is the sort of thing he's doing. So to cut a long story short, I would support the Muslim vote, and I think that is something that Gareth should be worried about.
I've met with the Muslim vote on behalf of the Green Party. They've endorsed some of our candidates already. But in terms of, I find the question slightly odd. I just think it's really important that people are politicised and that people get to vote and they're informed and make choices about their votes. And that politicians need to respect that. And I think we've got into a situation in this country with the first past the post system where there's a tremendous laziness about the way that British politics is conducted. And there are lots of people whose votes are taken for granted. And I think that it's wonderful that the Muslim vote's come into existence, so it's great that that community is so politicised. But if we want to end those kind of MPs that sit there, never break the party whip. I looked up Gareth's voting record. It seemed to me he'd only ever broken the party whip once, irrespective of who the party leader was. And I think that says loads about what we need from politicians. We don't whip politicians in the Green Party. We expect people to think with their head and their hearts about what the right thing to do is. And we need more politics like that in this country. And we need a more democratic system where we have proportional representation and people's genuine beliefs can actually be respected, rather than being forced to vote for a candidate that you're not 100% comfortable with, but at least he's not as bad as the other one.
The next question is particularly for the independent candidate, which is, even if elected, would independent candidates have the power to affect any change? I would like, in order to give the party candidate also a chance to speak, I would like to slightly rephrase the question and say, what are the pros and cons of being an independent MP compared to being an MP that belongs to a party, so that all the candidates can give their opinion?
Thank you. No, I get the question. And you might be wondering, well, what can an independent do on their own? But I think the important thing is that you can do what's important and what's needed for your constituents. We've seen Gareth does not vote in the way that is needed for his constituents. He votes in the way the party tells him. So in a way I can do more. I can choose to work with other parties who have similar views. I'm also one of many independents who are standing. And if you had a parliament of people who were able to think and act in the interests of their constituents, how much better things would be. But also, when you think about there are over 600 MPs in Parliament, but most of them are backbenchers. So they kind of act a bit like independents anyway. It's the government that are going to be making the decisions. Obviously you get the vote, but both major parties are whipped to vote in the way that the party tells them. So I think actually I could make a huge contribution by speaking out as to what's needed. And we see that occasionally with some MPs, don't we? They are good in Parliament, but they're so few and far between. We need more of that.
In Liberal Democrats, we don't have a strong whip system, but remember that in this election, it always used to be the case that Gareth would say at events like these, and I've stood against him in the past, there's a choice in this election between a Labour candidate and a Conservative candidate. No one else is going to be elected. Well, that isn't the case in this election. The Tory candidate has pretty much disappeared today, and I believe that the Tories were sending round something on social media saying, oh, the way things are going, we're only going to get 57 seats, and the Lib Dems were going to get 61. Now that's propaganda, but it means that a Liberal Democrat MP will be a strong and local champion for the people of Harrow West, and that is what I intend to do. And I will be a member of a strong national political party, but I will also put my constituents first.
Caroline Lucas, who for a long time has been the only Green MP, has stood up in Parliament and done, I think, as a Green. I'm very proud of what she's done. She's been a fantastic MP for a long time. And she's in a party, but in a way she's had to operate as an independent. But I think actually it doesn't really come down to whether you're in a party or an independent as an MP. What it really comes down to are your personal qualities and whether you're actually prepared to speak up and actually stand up for the values that you actually believe in. And ultimately that's what I think people should want from a representative. If they want to elect someone, they need to elect someone that has the integrity to stand up and speak the truth as they see it, and to listen to the people around them and make sure that they play the role that's demanded of them. If elected, I would really love to do that on behalf of Harrow West. I think it's a critical thing to do. Ultimately, parties allow people to develop programs, and they allow people to develop their thinking, and they allow people to organise, which is really important in politics. It's about winning. Parties really are about winning elections. But I think individual members of Parliament ultimately are about standing up and speaking truth to power and actually playing that role properly. Thank you.
The next question is, what will you do for the NHS?
Get rid of privatisation. Even our GP surgeries are being privatised, aren't they? There's whole companies taking them over. The amount of money, you know, my surgery in Harrow used to be absolutely fantastic. I won't say which one, but honestly, you cannot get an appointment now. It used to be very preventative in terms of things they did. Really hard to get to see anybody. We have these medical associates coming in who are not medically trained. I sometimes ask, I'm told I'm a consultant. They don't mean a medical consultant, a senior doctor. They're consultants, like kind of business consultants, which may have a biology degree or something. So we need to get rid of that, absolutely. And again, if you look at what the two main parties are suggesting, it's more privatisation. We have to stop that. And the privatisation is there already. They are using the private sector, so money is being given to the private sector that could be used, should be used within the public sector. So that is the major thing. Whenever we talk about, well, you know, we make more use of the private sector, which I think is West Streetings, isn't it? I think the King's Fund just said there is no spare capacity in the private sector. And it's the same group of people. It's not doctors being trained in the private sector and then they've got their own doctors. It's being taken from the public sector, which we pay for. And the private sector, you will see that they're not interested in the boring long-term illnesses that many of us will have, dementia or anything like that. They're interested in the things that will make a fast buck. And I would add to it that it's not just the NHS, it goes hand in hand with our social care system, which used to be part of the NHS. But now, people are paying vast sums to care homes when they don't have family to look after them. They're having to sell their homes to pay for care homes. This is just, it's such a crime. We have to stop it. So we need to invest public money, public service.
In principle, I don't disagree with any of that. Our manifesto, I'm quoting from one of the election leaflets that came to the office today, but you're going to get a similar one from me in due course. We believe that the NHS needs funds and it needs investment to deal with critical blockages. We need to recruit GPs. We need to reform NHS dentistry, and we need to reform the social care system that nobody's talked about and needs radical root and branch reforms.
I think at the heart of the issue in the NHS are pay rises with inflation for NHS staff. We have too many doctors leaving, we have too many nurses leaving, we have a massive retention crisis. We would put the money into the NHS. I think it's about £5 billion to give NHS doctors, nurses and other staff pay rises. I think this is critically important. The Green Party also has a policy on £15 minimum wage, which means hospital cleaners and people like that will actually have an income that they can actually live on. But besides that, we feel that there is a vast amount of money. So our programme would end up with the NHS having £30 billion a year more in terms of revenue spend, so that's medicines and salaries and things like that. We've also allocated a £20 billion capital building programme for hospitals and GP surgeries, and a £20 billion programme for social care to give free personal care along the lines of the Scottish model, and also ensuring that we've budgeted for social care workers who are often on very low wages to also get a £15 minimum wage. Ultimately, since 2010, the NHS has been underfunded according to the BMA by £322 billion cumulatively. And so if we actually want the NHS to work, we actually have to put a lot of money into it, which is why, again, I'll come back to the issue of tax. And we need to raise the tax to actually pay for the NHS. We would get rid of the privatisation, we would get rid of those contracts, as Pamela mentioned. Those also need to go. And I think the other thing that's really important is that the NHS is really reliant on staff from abroad. Often those staff come from countries like the Philippines or Sudan, where they really need those doctors and nurses to be working in those countries. It's not fair and it's not equitable that we take those medical staff from those countries. So there are two issues there. That one, we don't give those medical staff the welcome that they need here. We make them pay an additional charge to use the NHS by working in it and paying taxes. We would get rid of that additional charge for all migrants. But what we would also do is ensure that we come to some kind of equitable arrangement in the short term, whilst we make more training places available, so that it becomes a more equitable relationship between us and middle and low income countries that are sending their very precious doctors and nurses here to work. So we end up doing something that actually supports the development of healthcare in places like the Philippines and Sudan and India. And I think that's really important. Act of global solidarity and thinking about humanity as a whole. Thank you.
The next question is a bit similar. What will you do for education and schools?
So again, schools. PFI. When Labour were in government, we had this system of PFI, Public Finance Initiative, and both the NHS and schools are still suffering from that. So they're paying huge debts back. So we need, again, to take back schools into the public sector. What we've had across Harrow, almost all the schools are now academies. They're private companies running them. And so we need to stop that. They need to be brought back under the control of the local authority. And then we need to invest in schools. Now I see, because the Law Secretary I work, we have an education solicitor, 2 education solicitors, and they're needed because the amount of children who are being excluded, permanently excluded, and those children largely are children with special needs. And the reason they're being excluded is because the schools can't cope with their behaviour. And the reason they can't cope is because they've largely got rid of most of their teaching assistants. They don't have the support staff there. So it's really difficult for them. Teachers are leaving the profession in their droves because they can't cope. You know, the stress, the amount of work, everything. The low pay for London, people living in Harrow. How can you afford to live on a teacher's salary and rent a property in Harrow or buy anything? You can't. So we need to invest in it. I mean, Labour is saying they're going to get all these additional staff. Where are they getting them from? Where? Things like teachers, women, you know, people who have childcare or other caring responsibilities. It's really hard in some schools to be able to work part-time. And there's no reason that shouldn't happen. Part-time working, job sharing should be available for everybody so that it makes it easier for people to return after having children. Excuse me, or if they're looking after maybe older parents or somebody with a disability. So it's not rocket science. We need to invest in our services if we want them to work properly. And we need to stop privatising everything. It needs to be run as a public service, not a profit-making exercise for people.
Well, Pamela actually told us what is actually wrong with the education system. What has happened over the years is that as opposed to being a public service funded from the rates and from the council, it has become a system whereby a lot of people make a lot of money from a very small number of people. What we need to do is to ensure that the appropriate funds are put in to make the system work. And at the moment, frankly, I don't think it works at the moment because it's clear that it's a system that's beginning to break down and you don't get the best results. I actually attended a meeting, a private meeting, some months ago with a lady from Hillingdon, but the principal stands. The problem was that her son was being excluded from school again and again and again, and it seems clear that the basic problem is that the people concerned don't seem to appreciate that you can't get a lot of good system when there are no public funds being put into it. That needs to happen, and we need to put the money in where it's been taken away. Years ago, the school's delegated budget was apparently the sacred cow that no one should touch. I'm pretty sure it's been done and mutilated ever since. I think we need more funds to go into the education system and no privatisation.
Sadly, it does come down to money, doesn't it, really? And we've got to put enough money for teachers to be paid a wage where they actually want to stay in the profession, and we need to put the resources around them, and we need to deal with things like the Iraq concrete scandal, We need to end the academy system so that money goes in. We would put, I think off the top of my head, it's about £15 billion, which I think is more than all the tax rises the Liberal Democrats have proposed at this election into schools by the end of the Parliament, because that's the money the school system needs. When we published our manifesto yesterday, National Education Union welcomed what we had done and what we had suggested, because it was appropriate. We would put £5 billion into special education needs for those pupils that need it. And I think the other thing we would do that I think is really important is we would abolish Ofsted, because fundamentally it doesn't work, and we need schools to be a more caring environment for teachers and something that actually supports teachers' professional development and allows them as people to develop for pupils. Generally, we've got a much more holistic attitude. I think the other thing that is really key that we would do is that by the end of the Parliament, we would invest £4 billion in schools. In training, skills and training. Because we all know from our own experience of life, there are lots of kids that don't get it together when they're young. And as adults, they just start to realise what life's about, and they want to get their heads down and get a really well-paid job. Well, we would put the money into the skills sector. The Labour Party, in their manifesto today, announced without any more money, they were going to give an apprenticeship for anyone that wants it between 18 and 21. We're not promising anything that has no money attached. We're saying that that money should be there for education and skills, and we need to invest in ourselves as people if we actually want a functional economy. Illiteracy costs the economy tens of billions of pounds every year in this country, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and that's a crying shame, because really we've got the money and the wherewithal for everyone to be educated properly and to do that properly. Thank you.
Now we go back on foreign policy, and the question is, there are now economic sanctions against Iran. What would your stance be on this policy?
Well, I suppose my stance would be that economic sanctions have got to be applied on a kind of equal basis, not equal basis, I think of the word, but there's got to be some kind of continuity, if you like. So we tend to apply them only to countries that we don't like, rather than what they're doing. So Iran, yes, okay, terrible things going on in Iran, so we have sanctions there. But what about Israel? What about sanctions against Israel? So I do think sanctions are appropriate. I do think we should apply them in some circumstances. Probably that it is appropriate for Iran. But if we're going to do it for Iran, if we're going to do it for a whole range of countries, then we ought to be looking at countries particularly where there are human rights abuses. There's Saudi Arabia, there's Israel, there's a whole load of them, aren't there, really? So yes, if we're going to do it, it has to be done on a consistent basis. We need to understand where and when it's happening. I suppose that would be
Basically on the basis of human rights.
Yes, I think so. That would be one factor, but it seems to be done, just on political, of course it's going to be always political, but it's who we're friends with rather than how they're behaving. Now I think it's really easy to criticise your so-called enemies, whether that's a country, whether it's a different party. It's actually more important to stand up and criticise your friends when they're doing things wrong, and that's not happening. So if we say we're friends with Israel, I don't think we are, but anyway, that's what we're told, is we should be saying to them, what you're doing is wrong, absolutely wrong, it's got to stop. And if you don't stop, we have sanctions.
As far as Iran is concerned, there are obviously human rights abuses in this country. I would believe that the important thing has been, as Pamela has said, that we should apply sanctions across the board to those people that are responsible for human rights abuses, is against Israel for what's happening in Gaza and Palestine.
I think sanctions are really selective, and they're selective based on where establishment in this country and in the US wants to place its foreign policy muscle. I think that's just deeply unfair. I think it's clear that what's going on in Gaza really requires sanctions. I think we all know they need to take place. I think they won't happen because of the politics of the establishment in this country, and that will be held back. But I think there's actually a wider point here about our attitude as a country, and the attitude of our allies, is 25% of the world's prison population is in the US. And so we have this idea that somehow the human rights abuses are somewhere that happens somewhere else, that they don't happen here, and they don't happen in America. And I think that fundamentally at the heart of that is, one, we need to be hard on our allies, and two, we need to be hard on ourselves. We need to look at what goes on in this country, we need to look at what goes on in the US, and in France, and in Germany. I don't know how many of you have watched the way in which pro-Palestinian protests have been suppressed in Germany, and it's really shocking. And we don't have a sense that that's been called out in that way. I'd also make a point about Iran, that I think that really, if we're going to tackle climate and we're going to tackle conflict, then it really needs to start with talking to people and actually building bridges with people. And if we drop the idea that we are somehow so holy that we can make our judgment on everyone else in the world, then it's impossible really to talk to people. And there are lots of bad things that this country has done historically, and there are lots of things that are going on now, including arming Israel, which, has anyone talked about whether they're going to impose sanctions on the UK for continuing to arm Israel? I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? And so I think that at the heart of that question about sanctions is the idea that we actually need to have more open eyes and more honesty about the way politics is conducted and the way we view the rest of the world. And maybe we need to go with a softer voice and attempt to build some sense of common humanity and tackle some of these awful transgressions that are happening around the world by building some trust. Because I don't think we're going to challenge it through aggression. I think it's going to be changed through trust.
The next question is, do you think Brexit was a good idea?
Oh, Brexit. That was 29. Well, I never thought it was a good idea, but the reason it happened, I can tell you, is because politicians of many parties have spent years telling everybody that migrants are the problem for everything. So I think it was 2010, or it might have been 2015, but one of those elections before Brexit, Gareth Thomas had little cards. I was in the Labour Party, and I used to specialise in European and all European social security law, so it was a thing I was very aware of, used to meet with European Commission, so it's something I thought was a useful tool. And Gareth had these cards produced by the Labour Party saying, these are our pledges, which included they would limit the number of EU nationals coming to the UK. So I refused to hand those out. In those days you didn't get expelled for speaking what you thought. But I said the only way you can do that is by leaving the EU, and you're supportive of the EU, so why are you handing these out? It's so short-sighted. And of course he just mumbled something. But that's the problem. That's why we left Brexit. I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, I think it's hard to see how we go back now, isn't it? I personally don't think it's a great idea. We're in a mess, whether we have been in this mess if it had been a different government leading our exit from Brexit, I think it probably would. Having Boris Johnson and the Tories doing it was a disaster. But, yeah, it's a mess.
Well, I never was in favour of Brexit in the first place, and at the last election, the Liberal Democrats campaigned to remain in the European Union, warts and all. That's not to say the European Union, in fact, is particularly democratic or is not not a case where it doesn't need radical reform. But as far as I can see, in the referendum in 2016, an awful lot of people voted because they didn't want migrants, and the whole point of the European Union was in fact that there was free movement of labour across the community. So they were rather caught. So in what we would do as a party, we would start trying to get it back into the single market, which generally would work in favour of business. And in the long term, yes, we believe that Britain should rejoin if circumstances are right. And of course, it will take a long time to get rid of the poison that the Tories have managed to inject into European relations. So the answer is it will be a long road, but we would like to go back, and we think that will be for the good of Britain.
We're not really scared to say that we should rejoin as soon as possible. I think it's been a disaster. It was always going to be a disaster. I think you can have views on what's right or wrong about the European Union, but ultimately you have to work together with other people. There's some insane things that have happened. I find the Erasmus programme, which allows people to study abroad, the fact that they offered us to go back in again, we said we weren't going to do it. It's all quite crazy. And actually we need European workers here. We need those migrants. Our businesses need them, our hospitals need them. We need those people to come to make our economy work. And I just think you need to stand up and challenge the racism and challenge those people who said those things about that and just be honest and forthright about it. And I think on balance, the European Union is a really good thing for this country. I think this city was really enriched by it, culturally. I think it's sad how so many Europeans have left London since 2016. I think it was a more interesting place in 2016. And it was, to be honest with ourselves, it was a wealthier place in 2016. And Brexit has just been an unmitigated disaster at every level. And I think the really important point about saying we want to rejoin as soon as possible is it's a direct challenge to the idea, one, that the politics can't change things, because we can. And the other thing is that the undercurrent of racism that drove Brexit needs to be challenged. And the idea that it sits there unchallenged is a really bad idea. Because actually most people are actually in favour of rejoining. And it's just a narrative from elements of the media and right-wing politicians that somehow we've moved beyond that now. And we haven't. We all like to be Europeans. We want our star back on the flag.
This is the last question. What's your opinion about the junior doctor strike, which starts on the 4th of July?
So I'm a trade unionist. I joined a trade union when I was a teenager. It was a long time ago. I'm the chair of my Unite branch. I was a shop steward in the voluntary sector, which is horrendous actually, the charity sector, for a long time. So I support any trade unionists who are going through that process, who voted for a strike, and I would support them. I've joined numerous strike picket lines in Harrow and elsewhere over the years. I've never known a time where there's been so much industrial action, and that shows the degree of unhappiness of what's going on. It also highlights how removed our politicians are from people on the ground, their experience. So I do support it. It's awful because we don't want the doctors going on strike, we want them doing their jobs. That's what they want to do as well. And it's not just about pay, they're doing it to save our NHS, they're trying to highlight what's going on. So I support them, I'll probably go and join them on a picket line if I can.
I think if the junior doctors want to strike, then they should be entitled to do so. But what the problem is they're highlighting the basic underfunding in the NHS, which has gone on for years and years and years and years. And that is the basic problem there. So I would certainly support them if they wish to do so. But the important thing is we need to inject back into the NHS all the money that it needs.
said my other half will be on the picket line because she's a junior doctor. And a BMA rep. Maybe she's not quite still, but she was a BMA rep till quite recently. I'm also a trade unionist. I'm a member of the NUJ. I'm really committed to trade union rights. It's a really core bit of Green Party policy is we would repeal the anti-trade union legislation that's gone on since the 1980s. We would make sure that the minimum service level stuff that's been brought in that would prevent people like junior doctors striking is repealed, because we really believe in the right to strike and we really believe in the right for workers to organise. It's a key democratic right that people have, and I think it's really important that junior doctors are able to strike and protect the NHS and ask for their pay restoration, because it's shocking how much money less they're paid since 2010. You know, it's like, I think it's 28%. And actually the cost of restoring it, junior doctors' pay, is I know it sounds crazy to say it, but it's only 1.6 billion. And that's actually a really small amount of money in terms of the public finances. And the strike is probably costing the NHS more than the pay rise would have cost them to actually bring their pay up and restore it. And actually that's the government's fault, that's just stupid. So I'm very supportive of the junior doctor strike. And I think it's really important that lots of our public service workers have challenged austerity in the way that they have, and they need to be applauded for it and supported for doing so. Thank you.
Okay, I'm now going to read out the pledges that PSC has requested of candidates, and I'm asking each candidate to answer yes or no to each of them, whether they would pledge or not pledge. So, number one is, would you pledge to publicly demand and actively work to ensure an immediate, complete and permanent ceasefire in Gaza?
Yes.
Yes.
Number two, do you commit to stand up for the rights and dignity of Palestinian refugees by supporting the immediate and full restoration of UK funding to UNRWA and ensuring it can fulfill its mandate?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Number three, would you commit to support a comprehensive two-way embargo on the trade in weapons, components and military technology with Israel to ensure that Britain and its citizens are not complicit in aiding and abetting crimes, including genocide?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
But number four is about the ICJ and ICC, and we've discussed it already, so I leave that. I assume on the basis of the previous that they're all in favor. And number five, do you commit to support the suspension of the 2030 roadmap for UK-Israel bilateral relations and negotiations towards an enhanced trade agreement in response to grave violations on international law and the immediate imposition of a ban on trade with illegal Israeli settlements? So, would you support the suspension of the roadmap for the trade between UK and Israel, and would you support the immediate imposition of a ban on trade with illegal settlements?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Last one, number six. Do you commit to uphold the freedom to advocate for Palestinian rights through the democratic process and in academic, cultural and educational spaces, including by defending the right to protest and opposing any attempt to prevent public bodies from divesting or choosing not to procure from companies shown to be complicit in Israel's violations of international law?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm pleased to say that all three candidates support the pledges. I'm now going to ask each candidate to provide a closing statement, and you have 2 minutes each, and our stopwatch will be operating.
Thank you. It's been remarkably kind of consistent in our approach tonight, hasn't it? Very different from last week's Hustings, where we had Gareth Thomas, who was too scared to come to the Hustings and sat on a Zoom, and Abbas Morali, who is not here tonight. But there are 4 other candidates standing, and none of those 4 have bothered to come and speak to you. So I don't know about all of them, but I know that both Abbas Morali and Gareth Thomas have said they've got a clash. Now, there is nothing else for any of us to do apart from speak to the constituents to explain why we should be your representative. Now, if I am elected as your MP, I will not be scared to come and talk to you. If there are things that you disagree with what I do, if decisions I make, I will explain why I've made those decisions, and I will listen to you and understand. So I am backed by the Muslim vote, but I'm also backed by many people. I had a call today from somebody who was a constituent when I was a councillor, and he said to me, I've just got your leaflet, I'm so pleased you're standing. Can you bring round a load of leaflets and a poster, and I'll go and talk to everybody else on the street. Gareth's been there too long, and we need somebody who's going to get things done, and that's you, and I will.
In this election, you have to consider who is likely to make the best opposition to the incoming Labour government, because quite frankly, it seems there's going to be a Labour government whether we like it or not. But I think that the polls have shown that the Conservatives are going to get stuffed and they are toast. A social media contact was made to Tory members, I understand, 48 hours ago, suggesting that the Tories were only going to get 57 MPs, and the Liberal Democrats were going to be the official opposition. Well, I would like to be a member of the official opposition, and if I am, I will be voting at your request, and I will be doing the things that you want, not what the Labour Party whips want. And my record speaks for itself. I was a councillor in Rayners Lane for 28 years and would become also an advocate of people in Harrow West as a whole. So it's a simple choice. Pamela, dare I say, is an independent, and the Green Party haven't got any MPs apart from the retiring one. So it's likely that the Liberal Democrats will form the opposition in the next Parliament. I want to be there, and if I'm there, I'm going to be voting and working for you.
Did you know when the Labour Party manifesto came out this morning, they're actually promising to raise less tax than the Tories? And Liberal Democrats are only promising to raise tax 0.2% more than the Conservative Party of GDP. The Green Party is still a relatively new party, and we've had a massive explosion in representation in the last 5 years in local government. We now have almost 800 councillors. I think it might be more than 800 councillors, sorry, I've got that wrong. And we're in power almost always as part of a coalition in about 40 local authorities. Now that's all come through grassroots activism and people being involved in their communities, and we can make a real difference. Because ultimately democracy isn't really about Parliament, it's about people in communities standing up, doing work, making things happen, and bringing their communities together to do what they need to do. I'm probably not very likely to get elected in Harrow West, but what I really would urge you all to do, if you've liked some of the things I've said today, then really join Harrow Green Party. Get involved. You'll find it's a very warm welcome in the Green Party. It's a great place to get involved with, and we're a very democratic party. You can be directly involved in making policy, and you can be directly involved in making the party happen, and we would really like to have you there.
Thank you very much. The Hustings is now ended. I would like to thank all the candidates who have come, not those who didn't come. I would like to thank Brent and Harrow PSC for organizing these Hustings, which I hope has been useful. The aim of the Hustings was to help you in making an informed choice when it comes to the election, and I hope we have done something to facilitate your choice, to clarify your opinion. I would like to thank the South Harrow Baptist Church for hosting us here in this lovely space. I would like to encourage to join the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, regardless of your political views. You can all join on the internet. You can join the PSC nationally and also your local branch. So that is the end of the meeting, and go home safely, and thank you for coming.